The Next Chapter with Prim Siripipat is a production of iHeartRadio. Hey everybody, it's Prim. Welcome to The Next Chapter presented by Baron Davis and Slick Studios. This week's guest is former world number one and US Open champion Andy Roddick, who continues to be the last North American man to win a major, which he did back in 2003. So it has been some time. Andy is not only a phenomenal tennis player and athlete, but he just so happens to be an old and dear friend of mine. As many of you may or may not remember, I am a former tennis player and played at a decently high level. As a junior tennis player, I was ranked top 10 nationally and was a member of the US national tennis team. And then after dabbling a little bit on the professional tour, I went on to play at Duke University. Now, even though I was born in Mexico, Missouri at 12 years old, my family and I decided to move to Tampa, Florida, so I could pursue my tennis aspirations. And I attended a tennis academy called Saddlebrook in Tampa, Florida. So some of the big names that came through Saddlebrook included Jennifer Capriati, Martina Hingis, Pete Sampras, all former world number ones, James Blake, Marty Fish, and also Andy Roddick. So Andy and I have known each other now for a number of not only years, but maybe decades at this point, which makes me feel very old, but we have known each other since we were roughly 12 or 13 years old. So I was so excited to do this interview and sit down with him. We recorded this interview several years ago, and I flew all the way down there to meet Andy, do this in person, and it went on for over 2 hours. So we had to split this up into two parts. In this first portion, we do a lot of catching up. We talk about what it's like for him to be a full-time father now, juggling parenting duties with his wife, who's also a model and actress, Brooklyn Decker. And then we take a trip down memory lane and kind of dissect and explore our unique childhoods at the tennis academy as these avid and somewhat obsessed tennis players. And I think the two things that stand out for me when I listen to this portion of the interview was, number one, the fact that I was still clearly searching for some answers for myself about my own journey as an athlete and as a tennis player. And one thing that I was trying to find out was figuring out what enables an athlete to achieve greater and more long-term success compared to their other peers. What factors allow athletes to become number one in the world, whereas others can't do that? And also, what kind of traits do athletes develop that benefit them in the athletic arena, but may not necessarily serve them in other parts of their life? And one thing that comes up is the fact of how athletes have this amnesia and they're able to not only let go of the past, but almost like ignore it. Another thing that I notice that I think is really important in this portion of the interview is the awareness that Andy had at such a young age as a teenager to recognize that certain environments, particularly this tennis academy environment, was not going to serve him well as an athlete and also as a person. He needed distraction from tennis. He needed that separation from sport, which is something that we could not get in the tennis academy environment because, as he points out, your classmate was your friend, was your practice buddy, was your enemy because you were going to compete against them in a few hours in a ladder match. But then they would also be your prom date. As he points out, it was a very incestuous environment and there was no separation. And so after listening to this portion, it makes me think, was that the reason why Andy was able to transition away from tennis, but it made my transition that much harder? It's a fun and wide-ranging and at times hilarious conversation. I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, here's part one with Andy Roddick.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. I feel like the last time we had a conversation, it was way more amped up. we were at the Heineken Suite. We were at the Heineken Suite at the U.S. Open. That was about, at the time of this taping, that was about a month and a half ago. And I haven't seen you in several years.
It's been a minute.
It's been a while.
Life has happened.
Life has happened.
Kids.
We were just talking about kids.
Kids have happened.
The wives yelling at the husband
about
what they're doing wrong. Yeah. We were just talking about that. We could go on.
It's a laundry list.
There's a laundry list, yeah. But it was funny at the U.S. Open. That was the first time you and I had ever done like a real sort of like interview. Mm-hmm. And it was a sponsored segment. And you and I had the bar behind us and we were facing the camera. But then behind the camera, there was like 50 people. And it was really loud, but then the moment you and I started talking, it got really quiet. And then everybody just stared at us. Did that feel...
I didn't even notice it, to be honest.
Did you not notice it? Are you serious?
No.
How did you not notice that?
I don't know. I was enthralled by your questions, and so I just ignored everything else.
That is so comical.
I didn't even think about it.
That's unbelievable that you didn't focus.
But that's kind of like the thing. I mean, you're used to most studio, right? Yeah. So it's kind of, and we don't have an audience in this. Yeah, so I guess it's just the difference in what you're used to, right?
That is hilarious. But that might be why you're a champion and I was never a champion. Because you can get so hyper focused.
I don't think it had anything to do with hyper focus. Maybe it was just being oblivious.
It was so loud in there. Like to the point where it was like nightclub noise, and I was wondering if it was you have to worry about audio and all that stuff. But then you could hear, it was just like, you could hear a pin drop.
I had also spent the previous 3 days and the 2 days after we had talked being in those suites, talking to people in those suites. So it felt like a home game to me.
Yeah. Well, it seemed like this year you were kind of out and about doing a lot of things. And thank you for sitting here and doing this interview, because I know that doing media is not always on the top of your list. So I appreciate you sitting down. But it seemed like you've kind of been out and about this over the past year.
I don't know. I'm not around tennis much. Yeah. The U.S. Open is probably the time where, I don't know that I have more value than I do at the U.S. Open. So it was weird. I talked to you. There were just a lot of opportunities this year, and I don't know that. Yeah. I don't know what the reasoning was or why it happened or whatever, but it felt busy there also.
Yeah, because I was just kind of perusing around online and digging up some stuff. But like, you were over at CNBC, you talked to New York Times and all these other places. But do you go to the U.S. Open every single year?
I normally go for a couple days. Okay. This year we had a bunch of sponsor stuff, so the press is normally a fallout of the sponsor stuff. Yeah. So I'm happy doing media. Media for media's sake feels a little self-indulgent. So, if there's a reason, or we're promoting a product, or there's a goal in mind, like making my old friend Prim happy, then I'm happy to do it.
I love the conversation where it's like, Prim, I don't always do this, but if you really want to do it, I'll do it. I'm going to pull you out of the hole.
Press the button.
And make you talk. And we're just going to reminisce about old school memories.
Yeah.
So buckle down.
I'm ready.
But how are things in life? I feel like these days there's obviously less tennis. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of family involved. You were explaining to me that you're like deep into full-time dad mode.
Yeah. My wife is super ambitious. She's gotten a tech company acquired in the last year. She's on the 7th season of our show Grace and Frankie, which is in LA. We choose not to raise our children in Los Angeles, so that leaves me home while she's going back and forth. And bless her, she'll do 2 red eyes in a week just to spend a couple more days with the kids, and she's constantly back and forth. By the end of a season, she looks like a zombie. You get the bags and the travel bags and everything. But I think we both put a huge premium on FaceTime. We don't want to outsource raising our children, so that kind of takes priority over most things. And I'm fully aware of when I was playing and we were together. I was extremely selfish about schedule and what I needed and how I needed to do it and everything else. And so, it's been nice for me to kind of be part of a team. We were also talking off camera on how much of a selfish existence tennis can be.
I kind of, honestly, I don't think I can take out the selfish DNA in me. It's kind of it's in me forever. I tried my best to manage it. And now with a kid and 1 year old in a relationship, then my husband will gladly get on the show and tell me about my selfish tendencies that surface every single day.
Yeah.
But do you have to manage it, or do you think that you've completely, were you able to shed that once you left tennis?
I think so. I think pretty quickly. I think my selfishness came from an obsession. And, my thing was, I always knew that there was a huge talent divide between myself and the guys that I was trying to beat for the titles that I wanted to win. We're talking about the guys that are probably the 3 best of all time now, and they're other world talent. I wasn't that guy, but I had to trim the margins by, in my mind, making sure I slept, making sure I knew what was going into my body, making sure I was always prepared physically, that I was training correctly. I have a saying, I wanted to be a master of controlling the controllables, right? I couldn't control the pace of a court or, Roger's general Rogerness, but, I would be furious if I lost a match because of something that was a choice as opposed to an outcome.
You kind of have to be that way. I mean, that's not characteristic of tennis players. Every single athlete that I've talked to and doing this show, everybody has kind of admitted that we're all a little OCD and control freaks, because we are going, whenever you compete, you're going in a completely chaotic, uncontrolled environment. So that's what you do. You do everything that you can to create routine. So it's, so there's a little sense of predictability.
Yeah.
To it, right?
But once I took out that obsession, once the goal of every single day of my life changed for the first time in 20, 25 years, I just looked at everything differently. You could stay at dinner an hour longer and have more wine, and you could schedule a call or a business call kind of anytime and not around your practice schedule, and didn't have to be kind of pigeonholed into a certain, moment in time. And you were giving up a day once every 4 months to do the extracurricular stuff. So there was a sense of almost freedom as far as schedule and geography that I loved. And once I kind of took that away, everything became a little bit easier.
So interesting. So when did that obsession with trying to control everything come up? Did you let go of that once you retired tennis, or did you let go of it before, while you were playing, and that allowed you to walk away from the sport?
No, it was there when I was playing. I'm not great at moderation, right? It's a weak spot. I'm not, even to this day, if we're 3 minutes late from the time that I think we're supposed to be leaving, I'm like, we got to go. I get a little, and we're so kind of obsessed with time in sports. And it's funny because I was late to this today, but
thank you.
I know. Don't even say it.
Minutes late.
Don't even say it. My friends watching this will be like, oh my gosh, you must have been in a panic, and that's like my biggest nightmare. But anyways, I was so time controlled and so old habits die hard, but kind of the biggest parts of being selfish, I feel like they went away. I remember driving out of New York City after the US Open was over. It was my last event. And as I'm crossing the bridge, it was just like this, it felt like a deep breath. And it just felt like
in 2012.
2012. Yeah. And
after you retired, and you left
New York City. Like I was done. I made the second week and I had a nice little run. And I remember driving out to where there was no more obligations to the US Open. I didn't have anything around the corner. There was nothing. I remember driving over the bridge. I drove down to Philadelphia to see a friend, and it was like relaxed. It was just kind of
oh my God, that's
easy.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was a very strange moment.
I have to digest that for a minute because, in talking to athletes, I think the walking away from sport, physically, metaphorically speaking, is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every athlete processes it differently. I think everybody gets to a point where there's this like grind, it's confusion, it's tough, you love it, you hate it, and then you have a moment of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that your confusion happened many months before.
It wasn't even, but it's strange. Like I would have had a lot more questions. At that point, I'd still won 2 out of my last 5 events,
Mm-hmm.
and I could still play. I think I had injuries that year, but I was somewhere around 15 in the world. But I didn't think that I could go through murderer's row of Murray, Djokovic, Fed, Nadal, 3 out of 5 sets over the course of 2 weeks. My shoulder it was, for instance, I started the US Open in 2012. I was serving 140 something at the first round. And by the time I finished, it was like 127. It was just this kind of slow fade and we would get fatigued. So I just didn't think I could win the biggest tournaments. And I was like, if I win smaller ones, does that change anything? And I didn't think so. But where I'm jealous of team sport athletes is I could have been a very, very, very good second or third option on an NBA team at that point in my career.
You could have sort of hung around on the bench, helped out with
I don't
leadership.
even think bench. I think, you're 15. I mean, there's 24 guys on all-star teams in the NBA, but that doesn't do it in tennis if you want to win slams. I mean, you're having to win an MVP award, and I wasn't at that level anymore. But I think it would have been a much tougher decision on timing and everything in a team sport. I wasn't walking away from a franchise. I wasn't walking away from a given city's fan base. For me, I didn't believe I could win. It was I woke up one morning, I went to bed the night before, I was an active tennis player. I woke up the next morning, thought about it, and went in that afternoon and retired.
That morning?
I thought about it that morning. I called, Brooke was out running errands. I said, you have to come home. I'm thinking crazy things. And she came back and we kind of went through it. I said, I think I'm going to retire. And she goes, when? I go, now. And that afternoon that was probably a conversation at 10 a.m. I called my team, and one at a time they came up, and I told them what I was going to do. And then at the US Open, I don't know, was it 4 or 5 o'clock that evening, I had a press conference and I said, this is going to be the last tournament I'm playing. That was it.
It feels like it happened so quickly.
It was quick. It was the same day. I decided the same day and
But did anybody have it? I mean, was Brooklyn like, whoa, hold on, let's talk about this? Or had you guys talked about it before?
No, I thought I'd play. I always knew I was going to finish the U.S. Open. So for me, it was, can I do this and train the way that I have? Can my body hold up for another year? That was the trade-off. And then, year by year basis. And I didn't know. And there were other things that I was interested in. It was kind of already started a company, the foundation. There were things that I wanted to get to. And so that the whole mix, I had everything on one side, and then the other side was, still had a couple years left on some contracts. And I was like, is that why you're going to keep playing? And the most innocent parts of us that start playing a sport we love, that's not why you do it. And so that if that's the only concrete reason or the motivation for why I'm going to stay out here, for me, it wasn't worth doing.
You did it on your 30th birthday,
Mm-hmm.
so that was very fitting. That morning, you said you were having thoughts. Like, what kinds of things were going through your head?
I woke up in the morning and I won my first round at the U.S. Open. Started the tournament fully. I was still a tennis player. Won my first round. I woke up the next morning, shoulder hurt a little bit, and I instantly started like freaking out about a match. 2 days later, I had a night match that had been scheduled. Or maybe I didn't know what the schedule was, but it was a couple days away against Bernard Tomic, who at that time was an up and coming thing. And I just started stressing out about it. I was like, this is dumb. Like, I'm going to be a stress ball for the next 2 days. I don't know if I have the goods to catch lightning in a bottle and to give myself a look at the basket anymore. And just the more I thought about it, I was like, why? And I kind of walked through it and I was like, I think that's it. I just think that's it. And then
the questions that you were asking, had it felt like the meaning of tennis had kind of been lost?
No, it just, when I didn't believe that I had the upside to do what I wanted to do in the game, at that point, it felt like a job. And up till that point, it had always felt like an opportunity. So they were very different things.
now knowing that you're not a person of moderation, I am not a person of moderation either. I'm either going 0 or 200 miles per hour with my hair on fire. So that makes a little bit more sense about why you would just say like, you didn't want to be in neutral. You just wanted to.
I didn't want to run out the shot clock, and I always had this thing where I knew I was going to retire at the US Open, and I always wanted to retire knowing that I could still play a little bit. I don't know why. Maybe it's just an ego thing. And for me, it was kind of fun. Like the 2, 3, 4 years afterwards, you'd go play and they go, "Can he still play? Like, can he kind of do it?"
Of course.
And I wanted to be able to still play, but I would rather have that conversation as opposed to, limping out the door 90, 100, 110, the slow fade to where it's not your choice whether or not you're on tour anymore. You actually got faded out because you can't play. And that was like a fear of mine. I was like, that would, in my mind, props to the people who love it enough to get faded out. I did not want that at all.
It's so crazy to talk to different athletes and how everybody's approach is different. Because like you said, there are some that want to go out on their own terms at the peak or as best they can at the peak, while others say, I'm going to go down scrapping and clawing and fighting. And we can think of a gazillion athletes who have done that, and they will continue to play well into their 30s and maybe early 40s, and we're like, wow, this is getting ugly. But it's, everybody, I am not critical of anybody, because for me personally, it's just, which is the whole reason why I'm doing this show. I mean, retirement is not the only transition that athletes face, but it's one that's extremely personal to me, because for me, my career ended after college, and it was, I don't know, I was unprepared for that moment.
You feel like you're losing an old friend, and you were able to fight with that friend, and it was good times, bad times, but it's a strange thing to come to terms with.
Yeah, it's not even like an old friend for me. It's like my first love. My first, it's that first relationship. When you hear about people that, she was my first love, or my first love, and they broke your heart. And there's a lot of love. There's also a lot of hate, but there's so much invested in it. And then not only that, it's not just us being invested in it. Our families are so invested in it. And I think that's what's also, you and I have known each other since we were 12 and 13. I remember your mom. My mom says hello, by the way. Tell your mom I say hi. Blanche. And I remember your poodle, Nick.
Yeah, that's right. Jeez. Yeah.
But like our families, I remember your mom being there.
Well, it is like a little traveling circus of a family too.
It is.
It's and all, a lot of times it's your social existence too. And I think that's another thing that's really hard for athletes to walk away from.
True.
So my social existence always kind of was at home. I didn't like hanging out at the courts. I had, a PT that we would set up a hotel room next to my hotel room, and that's where I would do my work. I wasn't, the person who arrived at the courts at 9 a.m. and left at, 8 p.m. and had 6 meals at the courts. I like to get in, do my work, and I left. I didn't like seeing the same faces every day, 300 days a year. Yeah. I kind of kept it a little tighter. So my social existence didn't exist on tour. I have, my great friends, our good friend Marty and James, and they're lifelong friends of mine, but I didn't feel the need to always be around it. And I think that made it maybe a little bit easier to walk away also.
So what did you do when you weren't around it? Where'd you find the balance?
I don't know.
I don't know. How do you find balance? I like the strange thing. I was so excited for this conversation because it's like, it's weird when you know somebody from childhood, and I only remember you from those 2 years, whatever it was. And then I feel like I've known you for so long, but yet I don't know you at all as an adult. You know what I mean?
Strange, yeah.
And so our experience at the tennis academy at Saddlebrook, where we went in Florida, there was no balance. We were training 5 hours a day. We went to school in the morning. Everybody that was there, I was born a nerd. I'm still a nerd. So I tried my best to study and whatever. But most people that were there didn't really care about school. They were there to become a professional athlete. Golf, tennis, football, and all that stuff. So how did you find balance?
I don't think I had any for a long time. That's I think that's probably why it was so appealing to me in the tennis afterlife. It's weird. I don't hardly, I don't really think backwards much. I don't really think about tennis too often. Like I just don't, it doesn't.
Today, in 2019.
Yeah.
Was there a period after you retired where you thought about it?
Not a lot. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, look forward, you know, the Greatest Hits album is fine, but what's next? You know, it's you know, I wasn't that interested in it. And I don't know why. I think I had other interests. I was always curious about, you know, I don't commentate. I don't often, for me, if you feel too comfortable, you're not pursuing knowledge. You know, I'd rather kind of get into a space and learn about it and ask questions and be the dumbest person in the room. To me, that is more appealing than kind of doing the same thing over and over and over.
Something about being an athlete, you kind of have to be conditioned to never look to the past.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to look to the past objectively to learn from your failures and losses and then move forward. And I know that I am the same way where anything, even with like, sadly, my teenage years and 20s, even with relationships,
Mm-hmm.
once it was done, I never looked back, and I was oddly, strangely, like could move forward very efficiently.
Cold, Prim. Cold.
That's so cool. But I wonder if it's...
All your ex-boyfriends go, I was over you very quickly.
when you put it like that,
you meant nothing to me.
When you put it like that, it sounds so cold.
No, you put it like that. I'm not paraphrasing.
No. This interview is going horribly. No, but I think eventually what I learned about myself is that there was something about how, at least personally, my life operated where, you know, I was born in Missouri, you were born in Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
and then I moved to Florida at 12. And that was like heartbreaking for me to have to leave my family and friends. And tennis, there's a lot of sacrificing where you're moving around a lot, you're leaving a lot of family or friends behind.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of I had to develop a thick skin, an armor, if you will, to be able, so I could withstand having to move forward all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder if that's a part of it, because I am the same way today, where once something is done, I don't allow myself to look back. And it's, you know what I'm saying?
I do. I think as much as that, like, there aren't many moral victories in tennis. Like, you win, you lose. It's pretty clear cut. You can't have a good game. You know, in a team sport, you can be playing great. There's a silver lining. Your team loses. I'm getting better. Like there's a kind of a divide with tennis. It's like, you know, at the end of the day, I played well. You win, you lose, and it's just it's like the fairest of existences. Like it's just very. So I think for a lot, I still view things. It's like there's not a lot of gray area to me. It's like win, loss.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you lose, move forward. What's next? Like it's a very kind of clean, clinical break type thing.
And so do you think you just adopted that philosophy because that's the way tennis is? It's just easier,
maybe.
It's cleaner that way?
You're taking me to places that I haven't even thought about it. I really haven't. Looking back, that's probably we're probably pre-programmed to view other things that way, just because that's the way we viewed life and ourselves for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. For a while, I didn't like going back into the past,
Mm-hmm.
but once I got to a certain point, I realized I had to,
Mm-hmm.
because there were things that were holding me back, and they were a part of my coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I enjoy this conversation because you knew me too as a kid, and it's interesting to kind of dissect at least where our childhoods overlapped,
Mm-hmm.
because it shaped a lot of who we are today.
That's a weird thing. I mean, we went, like, think how crazy this is, and I think we touched on it. We were 13 and 14. We went to Cali, Colombia in the 90s.
Yeah.
And like walk down the street to like the market to get food, and like that's not normal. That's a strange, it's like.
I don't know. Why I don't understand. So back then it felt normal.
That's what I'm saying. Like, but my wife now, she'll be like, oh wait, so your mom took you to the U.S. So like when you're 9 and you would just walk around like New York City, and she's like, I was like, well, yeah. She's like, but you wouldn't let us. I go, no way. I don't know. Don't ask me to marry the two. I don't know. It is strange, but it's the way it was. I mean, you'd fly to. I remember flying to Hong Kong, and we stayed in the Salvation Army, and it's an open room, and there's 40 beds because that's where we could find a place to stay that night. And to the point we had.
When is that?
This was like 1997. This was. Yeah, it was.
Oh, so you're a teenager. You're in high school.
Yeah. So but like you tell that story and people are going,
what?
Like, where'd your luggage go? I was like under the bed, and we had to buy bells to put on it so no one would take it. And it's like, so, but it's just a strange thing. But like,
it's crazy.
It's like Eye on the Prize. That's what you had to do. You go over there and you try to play and get points, and it's just like kind of, it just never stops.
I want to go back because I have bits and pieces of your childhood, but I don't have like the whole shape of the story. So you were born in Nebraska, Midwestern guy. You still a Huskers, obviously. You're still a Huskers fan.
Yep.
Who are your sports teams these days?
Pretty much Nebraska. I
Nebraska.
have barely watched sports since my son's been born.
Which was 2 years ago.
This is our son's 4 years ago.
Oh, 4 years
so
ago.
I worked at Fox Sports for a while, and I was very well versed. And now I'm not. Nebraska is the one that never dies. Like that's every Saturday of my childhood. Like my dad.
And you still do that.
Yelling at the screen. Yeah. If I don't get overruled and have to watch Paw Patrol for the 27,000th time.
Okay. And then, but you grew up in Texas.
Texas till I was 11. Then I came and joined you in Florida, I think, at some point around there, finished high school there. And then Austin, Texas it's home for me. I won the U.S. Open when I was in Florida, turned pro, had a little bit of success. And then as soon as I won the U.S. Open, I got on a flight the next day to go to Austin to buy a house.
Oh, wow.
And go back. And that's where I wanted to be.
Austin's a good place. It's up and coming. It's where a lot of tech.
I think it's up and come. Like
It is. You're right.
It's
no.
like the traffic would suggest it's there. It's like a real city now. Yeah.
That's a good, past tense or present tense.
Yeah.
What was your first exposure to sports? Not just watching.
I'm trying to remember.
Participation.
I think the reason I played tennis is because there was a tennis club like 3 blocks down the road in Nebraska.
Oh,
and I didn't even really play. It was more like babysitting, but on one of the indoor courts, I remember these like Snoopy cutouts, and you would take the ball and you would try to hit the Snoopy cutout. And that was pretty much it. That's my first memory of anything. And so that was that. But I had.
Did you play any other sports? I know you played basketball in high school.
Badly. I played kind of everything, maybe under 10, soccer, baseball. And then I think at a certain point, the sport chooses you.
That's what you just said. I remember Andre Agassi saying that in his book, Open. He said,
which is like one of the best books ever.
He is. I just shared that with somebody the other day. There's only been one autograph that I've gotten in 30 years, and I've run into some athletes. I really don't. I'm not somebody for autographs, but after I read that book, and he came to Miami when I was in Miami working. I'm like, I got to get his autograph. Because that book was life-changing for me personally.
This is a side tangent and probably has nothing to do with this show, but he did one of the coolest things when that book came out. I think he had just retired and I was the top American, but I was the guy who was going to get asked a question because there was some pretty big stuff in there. Like there was some pretty heavy things.
Yep.
And so maybe 2 or 3 months before it was actually released, he called me and he said, listen, Andy, he goes, I'm not going to ask you to say anything on my behalf. There's some stuff in here. He goes, I'm going to send you a book and I want you to at least be able to read it. So you're prepared for your answers when it comes out. And he goes, I can't tell you what to say. He goes, I would like the opportunity, if you have any questions to ask me, at least tell you about it from my perspective. And I thought that was a great heads up. Like, I thought it was really nice because all of a sudden it would have been like, what do you think of Andre's hardcore drug use? And I would have been like,
that's heavy.
I don't know.
He did that. He extended that courtesy.
Yeah, and he sent me.
You were the American.
Yeah, so he like overnighted, and he was a bit of a mentor to me when I first came on tour. And but he overnighted a book, and he's like, take a week with it, and then just give me a call.
Wow.
And then I thought it was a really cool move.
Yeah, that is. That's a great story. Andre Agassi would do something like that.
Yeah.
I love him.
It was cool.
I loved his book. So you played basketball, baseball, you said, what else?
Soccer,
tennis.
Yeah.
And at what point did tennis really come to the forefront, or when did it choose you?
I think early. I mean,
When did you start?
I don't remember. I remember my brother would go like take lessons, and I hit against the backboard, probably 6.
Okay.
5, 6, something like that.
So at that point you were in Texas.
I was just around my brother, and that's what he did. So I'd spend, an hour and a half at a tennis center. You end up doing something. You go get a racket from the demo thing, and you take it out to the backboard, and you start hitting. But I don't really remember.
John?
Yeah, I don't really remember like the first time. It was Caswell Tennis Center in Austin. But I don't really remember. But I mean, I felt like I was always kind of good at tennis. Not to sound like an arrogant person, but at 9 years old, I was number 1 in the city in 16 and unders. And then you kind of start traveling, and you live in a small enough place. You're like, then you travel enough and you realize, there are other people out there who are really good too.
But in the meantime, though, when you were young, you were just blowing everybody out.
Yeah. And so you kind of have this complex where you think you're really good. And I don't know, at 12 years old, I finished number 1 in the country. And so then it's like, okay, you can play it a little bit. I was tiny.
You were?
Yeah. So
I called you Bear.
Yeah. That's right. And then, so I guess it just went from there. But when you start having results, and then you play well enough, there's a national tournament in March, and then in August, and then in October. So it's not really time to do all the other stuff, because you're kind of always getting ready for something. And so I don't even think it was like a conscious decision to like, okay, now I'm just playing tennis. I just think it kind of happened to where, are you willing to give up national indoors for basketball season, or whatever it was? And the answer was no, because I actually, I'd be participating on a basketball team. I might actually win nationals in this other thing. So I think
that's
that
really
I think that's how it happened.
Yeah, I was actually just having a conversation with Gerald Henderson, and he was saying that he had made the decision at 14 to play basketball over golf. And this was after Tiger Woods had looked at his game and said he was further along than I was at 14. But the athletes that I've talked to, and this was my experience, is that there's usually some sort of juggling as a multi-sport athlete, and then you come to a point where you say, okay, I'm going to choose. But for you, it just kind of happened naturally. I
think so. We moved. Do you want to start with like a new team when you move? So. And my brother was just always at the tennis court. So I think it was easier on my parents, it just, and I was pretty good at it, so it a lot of it just made sense.
So at what point did you realize, I'm good at this sport and we've got to make some changes now, because whatever we're getting in the state of Texas is not enough, and we're going to move to Florida? Well,
again, it was my brother. He was there. And so our original plan was to go to Florida, and we started off in South Florida. For his last 2 years of high school, because we didn't want to be apart as a family. And at the time, and there's training options now in Texas, but at the time, there weren't. And so we went there, and now that I'm thinking through it, that's probably what ended up driving me into the lane of Texas, although we moved there, and there was like an academy, so I was playing kids for the first time that were really good, and I was getting beat by kids, and it was, so... But
and then you got yanked.
But my brother's tennis dictated our terms, and then all of a sudden I was there. And by the time we were supposed to leave, because it was a temporary thing, we were renting a house in Florida. By the time we were supposed to leave, I was number 1 in the country, and so it was like,
12.
Yeah, and so it was like, maybe we hang out a little bit and see if this
in Florida.
Yeah, see if this goes anywhere.
So you were really only going to be in Florida as long as your brother was there.
The original plan when I was 10, was to go there. We wanted to be with my brother the last 2 years of high school before I went to college. And they're like, oh yeah, you can play there too. You'll have fun, and, you like to play. And then that 2-year plan turned into a 10-year plan.
So when you started in Boca though, and then at what point were you at Saddlebrook?
So that was when my brother went to college.
Oh, okay. So you said,
and then it was like
another option.
Yeah. And so then it was like, well, if we're going to stay here, let's get serious about it and go hang out with the Prim Siripipats of the world.
On cue. I was like, and that's when your life changed.
Let's go get beat by the 14-year-old girls for a little while, and then let's And then let's go figure it out.
So you were, I'm trying to remember, you were 12 and I think I was 13.
Yeah.
13, 14. I'm a year and a half older than you. I remember that.
Yeah.
But it's this weird dynamic because it was just this year. When you're a 13 and 14-year-old girl, as we all know, we develop faster than boys do. And so I stopped growing at 12, let's be honest. I've been 5'2" since then for 30 years. And but I remember being 13 and 14, and I was bigger than you. And the other person that was on our court was Travis Rettenmeyer. He eventually went to UCLA and also played on the tour a little bit. I was bigger than the both of you guys. And it sounds obnoxious now talking to you because most people know you as this, big time player. But at the time, I was annoyed because I was like, I'm on the court with these two little guys. I feel like I should be crushing them. But we had a good time though.
Yeah.
Both of you guys were very talented.
Travis was more talented. Travis was really good.
He had great hands.
Yeah.
He had great hands.
Yeah.
So you were 12 and I was 13 or 14.
Yeah.
What do you remember from that year? Because you were only at Saddlebrook for, a year? 2 years?
2 years. I remember it was a strange thing because there were older kids.
Yep.
I didn't like to back down much. And so I felt like I got in hot water a lot with a lot of the older kids. And it was just a strange thing. It was like a race, but it felt very foreign for the first time, right? Like socially and with tennis, and you're out of your comfort zone, and there's people from all over the world, and you'd beat a 15-year-old and that guy would mean mug you at school for a week, so it was like it was a strange thing. Like it was very incestuous. Like school was the same as tennis was the same as it was strange. There was, like, as you alluded to earlier, there was zero sense of normalcy. Like there was the person who you were sitting next to in English class, you were going to have to play a ladder match against at 3:00. And then it's just your neighbor. I mean, we live 2 buildings apart, these little cottage buildings. And so you'd go to dinner and you'd pass the people who you were playing and or going to school with. It was a weird dynamic for me. It was a strange thing. And I felt like, being the way I was, my temperament the way I was, I like to pull people into the gutter a little bit when we were playing matches. And so I don't think I would have liked it at 15 if there was some 12-year-old doing that. So it was a weird time.
It was because there were only really 2 academies in the early 90s. It was Saddlebrook, which is where we went, and then Nick Bollettieri, which is now IMG Academy. So with us, Capriati was there. She was much older, 5'5", and then even 6.5 years older than you. But back then, I mean, the people that have come through there, Martina Hingis came later, Blake came much later, Marty came after you. Him and I crossed paths around 15, 16. Yeah. Mike Russell. Yeah. But at that time, there were about 100 kids, but it was really like the best of the best. And me being an adult, and I've been back there many times, and going back with a couple of my friends, I don't know if you remember Katie Thompson.
Yeah.
So she has memories of going back there with her brother Anthony, and they said that they would get this sick feeling in their stomach. It's like this nervousness, this preparing for fight or flight, because it was so competitive.
It was a factory.
It was a factory, but it was better than Bollettieri's. Yeah. I chose Saddlebrook because it was a
smaller factory.
Yeah, it wasn't as much of a machine.
Yeah. I did better when I left.
You did better.
I went to a normal school.
That's what I'm so interested.
There was separation between, like, the kids at school didn't really. They knew I played tennis, but they didn't know that I was good. They didn't know it was like you're getting taken for face value, and what you do on a tennis court didn't define who you were socially at school. The way I acted on the tennis court is, I like to think it's very different than the way I act away from the tennis court. We just differently. I turn into a different human, kind of. And so I did way better, and I flourished away from that kind of fishbowl of tennisness.
What would have happened if you stayed? Do you think you would have gotten burned out? It's an interesting point to dissect, because it's a problem in youth sports right now, and because the specialization.
I just didn't like it because there was like this uber bro, like super older kid hierarchy. It was just a weird thing. So
there was absolutely a class system there.
Yeah, and it was very different for me. It was like we got along. You were sweet, but I think it was different because we weren't. You said you trained with Travis and I. We would never ever. Travis and I would fight. We're two dudes. We would never fight. You know what I'm saying? It was just a weird. It was a different thing, and there was a. I didn't like the culture. I didn't like there was not a lot of stress put on being nice, being kind, doing the right things. It was all tennis. Where are you? Did you win your ladder match? This, that, and the other. And I don't know that I realized that at the time, but I did way better away from that. And when there was separation between life and tennis, and if I lost a tennis match, it didn't carry over into school, a day or two later.
Yeah, I do remember because when we were there was only probably about 8 kids. I mean, we were 10% of the school, 90% of the school was all high schoolers. Mm-hmm. So when you and I are in 7th and 8th grade, that's still a big difference. In the grand scheme of how we know how school operates today, 1 to 2 years is a major difference. And then when you magnify it on the court, mano a mano, tennis, you're going up against a 15-year-old, there's a big disparity, but I do remember that when because we were one of the younger ones, and that's why we were on the court all the time. It's because there was nobody else to play with, and what I remember of you and I genuinely got along. And I literally looked to you as a brother, which is why I called you Little Bear. You're somehow smaller than me at that time. But I do remember you being very confident and at times cocky, but I was old enough to know that the people that were a certain kind of cocky, I would shut them down and crush them. I did not have a tolerance for that. I had even back then I had a strong personality, but there was a confidence about you that I was totally cool with. And I just wonder if back then, did you know your path? Did you know what you were gonna? No. So where did that confidence come from? And I ask that because looking back at my career, I wish I was one of those people where I was confident and cocky at times, because I think that would have willed me into a lot more victories and a better performance. And I think that innate confidence that a lot of champions have, like you, I just wonder where that comes from.
I don't even know if it was confidence and ability. I think I was very confident in my ability to compete. And so I was happy, fighting it out. I was happy competing. I was happy, trying to beat Keith Salmon, even though he might beat me up at school. I was happy trying. I
love the name drop.
I was happy to try to piss him off because of my competitiveness. That's something I knew that I could do every day and maybe do better than a lot of people. I always say, to this day, I was a very good bad tennis player. The days where I struggled, I would kind of mix it up a little bit, just try to fight, run a little bit. I was a good bad tennis player, and there was a cockiness about being able to compete and to maybe be tough daily, not in a macho sense, but just kind of dig in.
I do remember you loving to compete. You and Travis both loved to compete. You hated drilling. You were one of those players. I loved the repetition. I was kind of Rafa, where I needed a lot of repetition and a lot of balls and a lot of routine. And you were always really good about competing. Before I came, I told my mom that I was going to talk to you, and I'm like, hey, do you have any stories to share? She started laughing. I was like, I know what story you're going to share. But she always makes fun of me, which is very normal, about you and I went to some local tournament, and maybe we were coming back or we were having a conversation and the tournament was over. And I said to you, I was like, oh, I love, McDonald's. I treat myself to French fries after I played a tournament. And you made this comment and you were like, oh, so that's once a year? No, but it was.
That's just the worst.
It's not. No, but it was true.
That's the worst thing a kid can say to a kid. I'm like a bear. I want to crawl into a hole right now.
No, there's a lot worse things that you could say. No, but there was. But it was true though, because I didn't I didn't play as many tournaments as some other players
Mm-hmm.
like yourself did. I remember you playing every single weekend. You just wanted to compete.
I liked it. Yeah, I would have rather. I'm mortified that that's what came to your mother's mind, but
She thought it was funny and cute and endearing.
I wanted to do. Some people would play. I wanted to play a tournament every weekend.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't scared to kind of get out there and do it, but yeah, I don't know. I don't even know. It was the cockiness. Part of it was probably overcompensating for being like a small, tiny kid. Part of it was just probably knowing that I would bring the lunch pail and kind of go through the harder yards. I don't know.
So then what happened after Saddlebrook? Did you guys decide to move because you felt it wasn't working, or did your mom make the decision?
Yeah, I don't really remember. I knew we were going home or back to South Florida, where we still had a place, and went back into normal school, which I enjoyed. It's a small private school. You still have to be able to travel. Got into a group where actually Marty ended up coming back to South Florida. And so we basically had the USTA rejects down in South Florida. And I think,
are you serious?
Yeah. So it was the guy, it was the guys who didn't get chosen for the national team, maybe like just short. Right. So they cut my funding at a certain year, and then, Marty was the same thing. And then he got good, and then they cozy up again. But, but it was a lot of the guys who weren't on kind of the A team. And I think we all were kind of pissed about it. And I think there's 6 of us, and we created that generation, outside of James, who's a little bit older. We created the top 10 players for that generation with Marty and I,
Who else was in that group?
Jeff Boyd, Dave and Chris Martin, Bo Hodge. So they were good players. They weren't part of the kind of USTA machine, which was like LeVar and Simone Americo and like basically anyone who had a pretty one-handed backhand. That was valued. And so it was a different thing. And we played on, we weren't at Saddlebrook where the facilities were amazing, and you had hard courts next to clay courts, next to, 2 sides of a facility next to a gym. We played on our coach's apartment tennis courts, and it was 2 courts. And then it was like fitness. He's like, go run really far, so it was kind of tapered down, and we went to a normal school every day, and I like that better.
That's fascinating, because at Saddlebrook, so you leave a facility where you have all the resources in the world, and you're playing and competing with some of the best tennis players. And we had a gym at the time, and strength and conditioning coach Pat Etchenberry. And then you walk away, but now you're training with really good players. But you don't have nearly the resources or facilities that you did. And yet, but that's when you started to really make your turn.
Yeah, we all had memberships to the YMCA, and that's where we went and worked out every day. It was like apartment course and then YMCA, but it was awesome. It was the best. So
what happened? What were you ranked at that point? Around 16? So 13, 14, 15, 16. What was your ranking?
14s, I finished like 4. I grew a lot. I grew 5'2" to 5'9" my first year 16s. I dropped to like 50 in the country.
Wow.
The next year, I was 1 in the country again in 16s. First year 18s, I don't know what I was, but the thing that kind of took off, we had our high school coach, and then I lost first round of the Junior US Open one year. I was probably top 10 in the country, but top probably 40, 50 ITFs. And then I made another coaching change and met a guy named Tariq Ben Habilis. And at that point, I was good enough to go anywhere I wanted to for college with a scholarship, but wasn't really thinking about pro tennis. I was hoping for pro tennis, but it wasn't
Even after you won, this is after you won US Open?
No. I lost first round. And then, but all of a sudden I went and played some grubby money tournaments, like in Miami, beat a guy who was like 300 in the world, and stuff just started kind of moving. I won Eddie Herr. I won Orange Bowl on the trot, finished that year 4 in the world from 40 and like.
16?
This is my first year 18s. Yeah.
Okay, so you're 16, 17.
And then all of a sudden the year turns over and I'm like 2 in the world in juniors because people had aged out, going to the Australian Open. I won the Australian Open juniors. And every match I'm playing at the Australian Open juniors, there's like agents there. And all of a sudden, it changed very quickly. So we're looking at November, you're 50 in the world. And by the end of January, you're the #1 junior in the world. and you're probably going to sign.
Oh my gosh.
And
it happened so quickly.
And then I won 2 months later. I beat a top 40 player in Miami in a Master Series event and won that. And then it just went quick. So I went from 40 in the world in juniors to top 10 in the world in like 2.5 years.
But at one point, if I remember correctly, around 17, you were thinking about quitting.
Not quitting, basically giving up on pro. So I lost in junior Wimbledon to this guy named Michael Trojan, who I think he had a beard. He might have had like 3 kids. He looked like he fell out of the pub, and he lost the neck. Like I lost to him. It was like I shouldn't have. Like I'm sure he's doing great things now, but it wasn't my best moment on the tennis court. He lost to Guillermo Coria, who ended up being a really great player. He lost to him 0-0 the next match after I lost to him.
Yeah, because he had a letdown over beating a great star like you.
No, I wasn't a great star. He just wasn't very good, and I was worse than him. So
that was the match.
I remember practicing the next. Like my coach was like, back at it the next day. Marty was doing something amazing. He probably made semis or something. But so we're back on the court. Like junior Wimbledon, you stay at like a dormitory, and so he's like, training 4 hours the next day. You suck. I'm like, I do suck. And so I remember that day I was just so fed up. I thought I was terrible. Every racket I had over the bushes, into the woods. I flew home with no rackets. And I'm like, okay, junior year, I go, I could probably coast through, I could probably commit early, and then I'll just go to college. And so that's
right before your senior year then?
Yeah, so it was my junior, I was a year ahead. So I graduated when I was 17.
Okay.
So I was 16, but it was at the point where I could sign if I wanted to. I could commit, and the path would be laid out. And at least there would be, I knew at that level I could play. And then
had you started talking? I know your brother played in college.
He played at Georgia. So, I hadn't really responded. I hadn't really talked to any coaches. I hadn't really, but I wasn't scared of it. But at that moment, I'm throwing the rackets over, and that was what was in my mind. Like, we're going to commit to college. We're going to go, and kind of that's that. And then 3 months later, I was number 1 in the world in juniors, somehow, some way.
That doesn't happen to a lot of athletes.
No.
Not that quick.
Yeah.
And because for most athletes and champions, you have an inkling.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the story of. It's almost like, I think this happened to your wife, but it's not the story of, I'm sitting at a pizza place and an agent spots me and I'll overnight, I'm an overnight sensation and model. That doesn't. But it's crazy.
Mine was a little weird because normally you do normal school, then you go to a very tennis-specific place, and then you take off. Mine was a very tennis-specific place, normal school, USTA drops you, and then all of a sudden it's like you win a couple matches, it's all between the ears, lightning in a bottle. There's a new coach, and then it just went, and I felt like invincible. I went out and won challengers right away. I won 2 tour events in a row as a wild card when I was outside the top 100. I was 150 in the world. The first time I played on center court in Miami, I played a guy named Pete Sampras. And
gosh, I don't know him.
He was good.
Good.
Went out and beat him, and it was just like everything was just. At that point, I knew I could play. It goes in like these weird stages. Like I knew I could make a living. When I started winning, I won a challenger at 17, like made the quarters of a tour event. I'm like, I can make a living doing this. And I was fully confident. But mine went from like, I don't know, to I got this. Like it wasn't like a gradual transition. I don't know why it was that way.
In order for, and really anybody, just not even in sports, to be successful, the time has to be the right landscape, the right time. You obviously have to have the skills. You obviously had that. So it makes me wonder, because there's a lot of athletes out there who are trying to become the next generation, and they're trying to figure out what are the right ingredients. So it makes me think, what would have happened if you had the USTA supporting you at the time and you were at Saddlebrook? Would you have still become the Andy Roddick that we know today? You don't think so?
Mm-mm.
So what was it about your path of kind of going backwards where you didn't have those resources that made you better and helped you?
I think it creates a little bit of a chip on your shoulder as opposed to an entitlement. I think there have been a lot of entitlements with the route that you're talking about over the last 30 years. there was something like you gain confidence from being on these like crappy apartment courts and going to the Y. You feel like you're earning it. You feel like you're doing it the hard way a little bit. Kind of the disconnect socially was always great for me. I didn't want to see the same people all the time.
You did see the same people, though, right?
Well, who you're training with. I'm talking about like there was a difference. I go to school.
Gotcha.
And no one knew anything. There was a divide. And I'd see Marty and Bo in the hallways, and it's like you're laughing about something, but it wasn't every person. There was a divide.
So you had that
between
semblance
the two
of balance.
I think so.
It didn't have to be all tennis all day, every day.
No, it was still the priority. But like you went to prom, and it wasn't a prom with other tennis people.
Right.
It was like a real prom.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I always enjoyed a sense of normalcy, and I viewed tennis was my job. It wasn't my social circle. It wasn't my, hobby, and I treated it like a job. And I think that's why I actually did well. I wish more of the up and coming American players treated it like a job, in a profession, and a trade, and a skill that you had to learn and craft and be responsible for. Maybe I'm kind of learning more about myself through actually talking through it, but yeah, I did thrive like that. And the kind of separation was what I was attracted to, even when I was playing a little bit.
Interesting perspective from Andy about how he always approached tennis as a job. And I definitely think there is some truth to that, especially once you reach the elite and professional levels. But I don't necessarily know if it can start out that way, especially as a child. I think there has to be that sense of innocence and passion and just sheer enjoyment, having fun as a child when you're engaging with sport. But everybody has different ways of approaching things. And clearly that worked for Andy. But the one thing that I absolutely loved hearing from him was the fact of that he's learning about himself as he's talking through some of these things. And if there's anything I've ever wanted from this show is just to do that, to create this safe, trusting space for athletes so they can share, discuss, reflect, understand, and also heal from their experiences. And if any one of my guests can feel that way and be able to talk about some of these topics that spark a curiosity about something they've never explored, then this show is doing exactly what it was set out to do. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Andy. Stay tuned for part 2 next week. The next chapter with Prim Siripipat is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.